Great. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. So I'm David. So I'm a guest speaker, sort of, because I mostly work somewhere else, but I spend one day a week here at Royal. So one or two of you might have seen me around like some projects, things. And so in my other life, I'm a group leader, and I do a reasonable amount of recruitment, and I really move forward cover letters when I'm doing that. So I'm going to try and give you some insights into what it's like for me on the other side, reading together. So I thought it was worth setting out to start some things that I am and things I'm not going to do. So I'm not going to guarantee that you can get an interview if you follow some of the things I've said. Okay. I'm not going to give you any secret inside tips on how to get in STFC systems. Because that's you can't any. And I'm also going to try very, very, very hard not to give you any specific real examples, because something I'm going to come back to a couple of times is there's people on both sides of this, and it would be quite unfair of me to start talking about real people's applications. I will try and give you some examples, but more sort of fashion. What I will try and do is I'll try and give you the most important points I think to remember. I'm going to give you my view as somebody who does sit, shortlist, depending on which term you prefer, and frankly dreads doing it. It's not one of the most enjoyable bits of my job. And I think most of what I've got to say will apply to any application you choose to make, although if you don't have to provide a cover letter for one of them. But I'm also going to talk about getting some value out of the job adverts and tailoring your applications. So that should. Right, so I'm going to talk a bit about why you might want to spend some time writing a cover letter. How do I go from a really large number of applications down to a number I can realistically use? If I've got one post, I can probably interview somewhere between 4 and 8 people. So if I've got 100 applications, that's a very, very significant. We'll have a look at a typical job advert. We'll talk about which bits of it to sort of read. That will be all of it. Working out what I'm looking for as a hiring manager from the job advert. And I'm also going to try and explain to you how your application is assessed. Because particularly if anything sort of governmental and government adjacent, the specifics change, but the core principles are actually completely transferable. And then I'll talk about writing a cover letter that I think maximises your chances of getting through that. And I'll touch on the grad schemes at the end of my various you might be interested in. So, why write a cover letter? If I was interested in what the rest of the world thought their opinions were on cover letters when I was putting this together, and I found quite a lot of stuff saying, don't bother. There's no point. Nobody reads them. They're all going in the bin. You know, you might as well be better putting in 30 applicants. Well, I can promise you I've read every cover letter that's come in on any job that I've put out or that I've been on the panel. And this is actually your chance to differentiate yourself. I might make myself slightly unpopular by saying this, to a pretty good approximation you'll see these ones. I mean, there's some variation in there, but not a lot. So your cover letter is your chance to actually set yourself apart from your peers or competitors, depending on how you. You can hammer home the core competencies that I'm looking for. And this is an important point to remember. If I've got 100 to read, realistically, I'm going to spend about 2 minutes reading. Unless you can convince me that I should be spending. Because if I've got 100 to get through, so whenever I'm hiring, I'm always conscious that I'm competing against other jobs as well, but I want to get the best candidate. So I'm also competing in the way that you're competing for the job, I'm competing for too. And that means I try to do things in a fairly timely fashion. I don't like to let applications languish for 3 months while I generally work my way through. I try to get through it all, actually, probably within a week, in and around all my other jobs. So I cannot spend half an hour as much as I might like to. So what are you aiming for in writing one? Well, you can clarify any ambiguities. So some jobs might have a junior or a senior, but you specify, I'm applying for this one, it's the scoring points. You're able to score more points, we'll talk about points later. Hopefully to get me to read your application more closely, to spend a few more extra minutes making sure that you're doing it, and you're able to be concise, right? Make it easy to get things out. So, by the way, you might notice that my slides don't have very many pictures on. I hope this doesn't send you to sleep. But I have an deep-rooted hatred for sitting in talks that are filled with pictures of smiling faces that don't have. So it's pretty worthy. I'm sorry. No, actually, I'm not. I'm sorry. Right. So, how are you going to achieve those goals? We're going to read the job advert properly. Okay. We're going to do a little bit of web research, and we're going to write a short letter. Short is important. That makes it really clear how amazing you are. What we're not going to do is spend days and days and days doing it, because you're probably going to put in quite a lot of applications, and you don't want to be spending weeks on each and every one. It's not realistic. So, I mentioned at the start that I dread SID, and I think this is something I want to emphasise, that there's people on both sides of this. So at work, hiring is sort of the second most important task I have, after not killing and maiming the staff I already have. And if I get hiring wrong, it's really, really expensive. So to a good approximation, it doesn't actually matter whether you're junior or senior. An employee costs about £100 the additional. And even if I take on somebody who's really, really, really bad and clearly bad, it's probably going to take me 6 months to go through the probation process and do everything fair. So it's going to cost my employer 50 grand, right? And that's before you consider any of the damage to people. So I've got some sort of I've got some stick motivation here to not mess it up. But I also know that you guys will spend time writing for applications, and I want to make sure that I'm giving you a fair deal. So I try and take all of this process really seriously. I set aside dedicated blocks of time to make sure I can sit and go through your applications, get it, spend as long as I can use it. And so it's worth remembering that applying for jobs can feel deeply impersonal, right? You send off 20 applications and then you get responses. And so for those 18 where you didn't get an interview, it probably doesn't feel like there was a person involved somewhere, but there was. And years ago, I did some training titled How to Manage a Manager. And it was all about trying to get as much out of that relationship where it feels like everything should be coming to you. But actually, it's much easier if you sort of take it around and go, you're a person I want something from, right? And I can get something out of it. So if you remember this person on the other side, you're trying to make it. That might help you actually get through this process. So, how does that shortlisting process work? Well, first of all, it doesn't look like this. When the first role I was the hiring manager for someone intern, and I was slightly horrified by the number of applications I found myself having to go through. I sort of wasn't prepared for it. I was pretty junior myself. And when I said to one of my colleagues, how on earth am I going to do this? They said, Anna, you chuck them down the stairs and you sit, anybody who lands at the bottom of the stairs, you don't have to worry about. Just read the ones that are on the stairs. Now, they were joking, right? But it can feel a little bit like that is actually the process. So what really happens is we convene a panel, right? And that will probably be the interview panel. And we have scoring metrics. It's very dull. And then I sit down and I read all of the applications, and as I go through them, I score them on my matrix. I give you all some points. And then the panel meets, and we all check our scores against each other. Okay? And if the scores are divergent, we'll discuss them, and we might reread an application at that point. But if we agree, we're moving straight on. Because I've already spent a whole day reading these applications, and realistically, I'm going to spend probably another half a day doing that attention. So in total, it's going to be about 5 minutes per hour of my initial story. So roughly 2 minutes on CV, roughly 2 minutes on your cover letter. And that assumes that my computer system is actually usable, which really is not. So you're not going to get a huge amount of time. So you've got to make it count, you've got to grab me straight away. And when the panel convenes, I mean, it's never said out loud, but it is one of the aims, is to get you very quickly. Because you're taking 3 or 4 people's time for half a day, so that's already another 2 business days of effort. And so if we all agree, we're moving straight on. Even if you are the most amazing candidate ever, we're still moving straight on. I might hope we get through 3 hours. In practice, I don't think I've ever managed that. That's how long I work, with a comfort break in the middle, but we normally end up running along. And we try really hard to make sure we've given everybody a fair hit. So where we disagree, we do come back and we do agree on questions. And say, why did you say it was a 2 rather than a 5? You know, and we'll try and figure it out. But we don't have a huge amount of time. So how can you help me? Well, let's look at talk about some job adverts. Okay. So when you're presented with a job advert, there's normally some stuff right at the top. Well, there's the very initial job title, maybe a salary if you like. And then there'll be probably a few sentences which are along the lines of, this is a really great dynamic place to work, right? And I can promise you that I did not write that. And you would not believe the number of people who then copy and paste that into their cover letter, right? It's like very common. And once you've read it multiple times, it's very wrong very quickly. Then you might have something after it. So that's sort of, you read that, and that's maybe some exact phrasing. Then you've got some bits after it, which will be more specific, it might be about the role or the group you'll be working with, the place you'll be joining. And the hiring manager probably did write that. And it's written both to tell you what the job is, but also hopefully to try to lure you in, right? Because again, I want to hire the best person for this job if I possibly can. However, I want this parity back at me even less, because I don't like the things I've written, and I will remember writing it. But there's normally some stuff in here where you can be extracting some keywords from it, and you might be able to do a bit of research around and find out something useful. So I chose a real example from my other place of work for a job that closed last week. It's an apprenticeship, so it's not the sort of thing that any of you can be applying for, but it's I thought it was useful to go through it for something that definitely none of you actually apply for, so you can't blame it. So this is a radio protection apprentice. Okay, so there's this. There actually wasn't any blur about the gender, it's slightly dynamic place. It was straight into about the group. So health, physics, and facility safety group supports the radio protection function, radioactive waste service analysis. The apprentice will develop the technical skills and competencies required to provide them. So, you know, that's we're going to give you some skills and you're going to learn some stuff. So I'm trying to pull you to assist staff and users like this. And the apprentice will gain the knowledge and skills required for the stable characterisation process. So it might feel like that's all advert for you, but there are some things in here which I think go through and I mean, are there any bits in there that you think, oh, I might, if I was going to apply for this, I might have a bit of a Google. Yeah, any bits you think leap off the page at you? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're doing. You might want to actually look up what this radioactive waste service is. What does that involve? So, I mean, when I was reading this, these are the bits that leapt out at me. Yeah, I want to have a look up what this ISIS place is, find out a bit about what radioactive waste service actually means. The staff and users thing is interesting. I think clearly I'm going to be expected to interact with internal people, but also externally facing. So I might be able to drop in something about my skills there when I'm putting together my letters. And then there's also the safe characterisation and processing, which again, maybe I can do some Googling around what that involves so that I can make mention. Okay, then you've got the person specification. You might see this written in slightly different ways. For every role I have ever recruited, the person specification is literally the scoring matrix. You don't have to do any guesswork. It is literally there, written on the job advert, right? You can create your own scoring matrix by reading the job advert, and you know exactly how I am going to score you once you have read the advert. You might not know the numerical scaling system, because everywhere I've done this, it's been slightly different. I did principal civil service, I think scores from 1 to 7. I did some university recruitment a while back, which is I recall went from 1 to 10. There's other systems that go from 0 to 4. Doesn't really matter. You can make up your own one, but you know what it's going to be. Okay? And some places will even tell you which of those criteria count for the interview and which count for shortlisting. So if it's shortlisting only thing, you don't have to worry. Sorry, if it's an interview only thing, don't worry about it in your application. Don't devote words to it, because it won't get you any points. So there will be a numerical score in some way. I picked an example one here where if you present absolutely no evidence, you get a 0. If you've got someone who haven't met the minimum criteria, you get a 1. All the way through to, blimey, this is the best thing I've ever seen, that bit. The number of people who get 3s and 4s across the board. And I have never had a candidate who's got maximum points in every test. Okay? If you say you've got 8 criteria, so that's a maximum score of 32 on my scoring system. I'd say typically the people getting, the people who get the job at the whole end of the process are maybe getting 28, 29. Absolute tops. Okay? So you can give yourself a chance. And the CV and cover letter, if those are the two things that the job application requires, they're both used in this scoring process. Some roles might have essentials and desirables. If you do not meet the minimum level in the essentials, it doesn't matter how many points you've got in the desirables, your application stops there. Right? I have seen people who have written amazing cover letters explaining how they meet all the desirables, and they've forgotten one of the key essentials. Right? There's no evidence presented for it in any part of their application. And I can probably guess that they've got modification or whatever, but it's not explicitly written in there. And these systems of science, you could debate whether they are fair or not, but they are trying to be fair. And so if you present no evidence, you're going to get a 0. You haven't got to go all in, but if we'll see in a second for the apprentice, it was particularly GCSEs. You don't need to spend 8 pages going on that. But just make sure you've got them in there, because if you haven't, you're lost. Okay? So here's our apprentice one. And so you will see after each one of these bullet points, there's either an S or an I. Well, sorry, there's a question.
This is that's correct.
Yeah, so no, I'm going to come on to that in just a moment. So there's an S and an I after this. So this particular employer is tells you whether you need to worry about it in your application or whether it's just going to come up. Okay. So if it's an S, it's shortlisting only. If it's an I, it's interview only, and it's both. It's both. Okay. So those are the only things we have to worry about in our actual application. We can forget those first two because they're not going to give us any points. And then there's the last bits of the job advert. And I do encourage you to read because there'll be helpful things like how to actually apply. And you're not going to discover that you've got to use some bizarre system at the last possible moment you haven't managed to register. It may or may not bother you if you've got to have a really invasive background check. Some roles, particularly in government, require that. And I remember a friend of mine when I was an undergraduate, we started to apply for jobs. He was dual nationality, and he was really interested in the defence job, which he got halfway through writing his application before spotting he was going to have to give up his dual nationality, which he wasn't going to do. He could have saved himself half a day if he read the application properly at the start. There are also some things in here which might help you. So in the apprentice example, there is this what's called a disability confidence scheme, which I think really brings only positives. So you have to opt into it, you have to contact the HR team and say you want to take part in it. But the hiring manager's never told you've opted into this. But it allows the HR partners to make appropriate adjustments. You can, so I have done this, and I have interviewed people where I know they came through the scheme because they didn't initially make it through the sifting, but then they were able to be interviewed as well, and then they had completely blew me away. So it was a positive thing for both sides. So do check, because there may be other components there. There's a variety of different schemes which could apply to you. So check, read, see whether it does. It's certainly, where those exist, they certainly don't count against you because the hiring manager is not told. So if somebody's opted into that scheme and they get through the shortlisting anyway, I'll never know. So what will we take away for that apprentice? We've got some essential requirements we've absolutely got to cover. In this case, there were no desirables. That's increasingly common. It's some advice that's changed for me as a hiring manager. So I just realised there's some clock. There's no desirables. That's increasingly common. It's another sort of widening the number of the diversity of applicants you get, because there's a very significant fraction of the population who will only apply if they feel that it's in absolutely every single possible box. So if you don't have so many boxes, you will increase, as the hiring manager, I want as many applicants. So you might find that it's not desirables. And we've got some extra points that we could have to see find out. So, right, there we go. I still don't talk about cover letters. We're finally getting there. Keyword bingo. I guess that's something you might have come across before as a concept, but if you haven't, the idea is that you're trying to make my job as easy as possible by just listing basically my keywords and saying, here I go, I'm picking up things here. Okay. And that does make it easy for me to build a scoring matrix. But it's really, really, really boring. And it doesn't really make you stand out. So personally, when I'm applying for things and when I'm reading things, I don't mind you playing keyword bingo in your CV. Because CVs are normally quite long, and extracting the relevant information can be a little bit difficult. I do much less so in my cover letters. I have that scoring matrix in mind when I'm writing it, and I might use one or two of the words, but I try not to make it quite so blatant in your face. Yeah. You've got okay, but it's the comfort. Oh, I thought somebody would ask me that question. I started writing a slide on this, and then I decided I didn't have a good answer. I think if it's a proper cover letter, I prefer not, because it's a letter. But I wouldn't say I wouldn't mark you down for it necessarily. But I like, particularly if there's something that's like good written communication skills or something, then I think actually being able to structure a piece of coherent prose helps. If it doesn't have any of the criteria like that, it definitely won't count against you because there's no scoring associated. But yeah, I personally like a couple of, when I write the cover letter, I bullet point it before I turn it into words. But yeah, I like a few paragraphs, but a few on So I'm not going to say don't do it because it does help, but be careful how you employ it. So for our apprentices, to answer your question, where would I focus my cover letter? Well, I am not going to waste any time in my cover letter talking about my GCSEs because frankly, they're in my CV. I'll get what I get for that. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the two things that are interview only criteria, so I've marked them white, so you basically can't read. I'm going to focus on four, and I might. Now, if my experience of using Office had an amazing example of how I could work as a multidisciplinary team, then I might combine the two of them. Otherwise, I'm probably going to say, I've got whatever the current good grade is in IT and GCSE, and I'll move on. But I try and pick a few people to focus on so that I can use my limited amount of time as wisely as possible. So, if we go back to those keywords we found earlier, now I promise this wasn't a setup because I've forgotten about this in the story when I was going through this. But I did have a Google for some of these because I thought, well, can I find you some nice examples? So when I do this, I'm looking for perhaps some news stories or public reports. When I applied for my first job at STFC, they had recently had an international review of the group I was applying to work in. And I found that when I did my first Google. And then I went through it and said, right, so here's what the International Panel of Experts said you needed to do. Here's how I need as many of them as possible. It didn't have anything to do actually with job application, but I'm told it's what got me into. Basically, you're looking for anything that can set you apart from the other applicants, something that shows that you've got a little bit of drive, a little bit of get up and go. So in this case, when I Googled the radioactive waste thing and ISIS, I got this news story about how that particular group has just massively increased its recycling rates. Okay, that's the thing I can drop in there really early on and say, look, I've looked you guys up too. I've done a bit of thinking about this. I'm not just going to need you to come and hold my hand through absolutely every task. So if it's a cover letter, I would always structure it as a letter. But I keep it really, really short. You really shouldn't see the page. I've said you could maybe go to 2, but I would only go to 2 if your hiring manager has put like 30 bullet points of the scoring matrix in and you're struggling to tick it off. Ideally, 2/3 of the page are actually content. And do not get that going. I mean, like if you're crossing onto the second page, you want to do a couple of lines at most. And then I have a nice brief introductory paragraph, which now I said it want to be interesting and sort of punchy and to grab my attention. And then the first thing I'm going to tell you to write is to mention the job you're applying for. And the reason for that is it immediately tells me that you have personalised your application. Right? I immediately, with the first sentence, I go, there is a chance there'll be something of value or interest in the rest of whatever this is. Okay? And it also convinces me that you've applied for the right thing. And then I have a short statement about why you're motivated to fill in this application. So, hey, I drafted one for that radio protection apprentice. Attach, enclose, whatever you want to say, my application for this role with whatever the special set of keywords is, job code, it just, I read that and I go, right, you thought, you've at least opened this document and changed the first sentence. Right, and then I was excited. I like that when I'm writing it. I like to feel like there's a bit of energy in the letter. And why was I excited? Well, I think the sort of stuff you do is really important, right? And then I dropped in that I've done my searching, and I found out that you guys have done this really exciting, great work, and I'd love to join this team. Now, you might not be able to find something like that. I mean, I promise it wasn't set up. I just thought this was a nice example of something that I was confident that I could apply. But there's normally something like this, or at least something you drop in to explain why this is important. And if there's something about being highly motivated, a scoring, so this is starting to be extra points. And then you've got sort of you fill in the middle. I was tempted to add a picture of a pie here, which I didn't go. But you're going in your big points, right? This is where you're going to smash through every part of it, and you want every single word to count. You do not want to be telling me about other people. Okay, this is a thing I see sometimes where I've said that, you know, I want to be able to work as part of the team. So you tell me about what the other people's roles in this project was. I don't care. Don't tell me what Bob was up to. He's not applied for it, or maybe he has, but he'll probably tell me. You know, it's focus on you. Right, and what you did. You didn't just do a group project. You did these things in the group project. This is how they relate to the job. So I had a go at it. I was trying to think about somebody might apply for an apprenticeship. So they're not going to have necessarily loads of group examples. Maybe they've got a weekend job or something. So I've gone with. I love, sort of mixed environments. During my studies, I've worked as a multidisciplinary team, so there you go, that's my not keyword bingo. To put on the science faculty's opening, where I was demonstrating how different sorts of shielding interacting with radiation. Okay? And I had to keep members of the public safe by following systems. So I'm trying to work in there that I've got some interest and some enthusiasm for radiation protection, because that was one of the key scoring metrics. I'm assuming I did actually do this. Shouldn't just make up so they can come to be truthful. Like I say, this is sort of based, assuming that I've got through one of these, whether I was finishing my A-levels. And then there's some stuff about controlled environments, right? Now, you can find ways of giving yourself points, even if you've not got necessarily, the sorts of people applying for the apprenticeship, they're not going to have experience working in controlled radiation environments, right? But they will have experience of having been involved in other sorts of controlled environments. And it might not get you a 4, but you don't have to get 4s in absolutely every category for the mission scoring matrix, right? You need to get enough points to push everybody else out. And so, this person's got a Sunday job in the kitchen, right? That's a controlled environment. They wouldn't be worried about cross-contamination, and they've got to try and maintain high safety standards. And I do this, and I work very hard, and look, my employer's great. And I would try and keep it to a couple of paragraphs. And then I'd wrap up in a positive manner. I like ones that then sort of remind me again why they wanted this, why they were motivated to apply. In this case, it would also be a nice chance to talk about the enthusiasm of science, because that's one of the scoring points. I don't see any harm finishing with a positive and assertive statement. I know plenty of people are comfortable doing that, but I never have a problem reading it. Somebody would be happy to talk to me in an interview. Because if this goes well, that is what's going to happen next. I will say, I'm not particularly picky about grammar punctuation, but for some reason, the use of sincere faith really irritates me. And again, for a relatively small, you'll probably be writing a few cover letters. So you might as well just learn how to do it properly at the start and then deploy it properly throughout. So, if you manage to work out who the hiring manager is, then sure, citing sincerely. But if you're just putting it into a sort of generic one, well, I'm faithful hoping responding. Right, and then you're going to submit it. And the good news is that we've read our job out, but really, really carefully, so we know what we need to do. My advice, and this goes for almost any writing you do in any context, is to write it a few days before you want to submit it. And then close it and go and do something else. Probably not, unless you've got loads of deadlines that are really stacked up, probably not applying for other jobs. Go outside. Do something that doesn't involve thinking about assignments. Preferably for at least a day, you know. And then when you come back to it before you submit it, you know, set yourself a calendar reminder so you don't forget. Read it back through. I've told you, you know where the scoring matrix is. You can score yourself. And if you've given yourself a day, there's a chance you've forgotten what you've written, the assumptions that you've made about how you qualify. You can spot them. You can get a friend to proofread it. I will be brutally honest with you, I still get my dad to proofread applications for me. I'm not too proud to admit that. Sometimes I get my mother-in-law to do it as well. She was a history teacher, she's very good at picking up all my spelling and grammar mistakes. I'm going to be putting in an application for a secondment at the end of this week. I will be getting my dad to proofread it. Like, you know, you can have an agreement with a friend that you proofread mine, I'll proofread it, it was fine. Just, but get somebody else to look at it. If you want to, you can get it to school. But it, again, it just helps to make sure you haven't said something silly. It's hard to proofread those. Right, I've just about finished. So I argue cover letters really do matter, especially at your career stage, because really you're trying to demonstrate potential. You will be very lucky if you happen to have all the, you know, loads of experience in everything, right? But what you're trying to say, I could do this job, I've got the potential to go out and do these things. And the cover letter is your chance to set out that story. Read the job letter really, really carefully. Don't rush it. And do a little bit of wider research. Like I said, I don't think you need to spend days every single one of these. But half an hour, a bit of Googling around it could be time really well spent. Keep your cover letter punchy. Focus on things your CV can't easily convey. They're there to work together as a pair. Lots of repetitions, not didn't be okay. You know, focus on things you can't get across in there. And try and give yourself a little bit of time to forget what you've written before you do. Right. I said I'd mention some grad schemes. These are chosen principally based on grads I know who played school. With or against. So I know STFC run a graduate scheme because actually I've worked with them. The applications are normally so this is a terrible time to be telling you about grad schemes because they're basically closed at the moment. But you can sign up for learns. Something you might also want to know of, which I know we're in the process of sorting out right now, is summer internships. Now, okay, so that's a great chance to do some work and get some experience. But actually, in terms of applying for jobs, STFC in particular, their summer internships are run exactly like doing. I have to put in as much work to recruit a summer intern as I do to recruit a permanent scientist. And for you, that's very valuable. For me, slightly frustrating because I spend about 3 weeks recruiting a 6-week placement student. But it's amazing for you guys, and I'm happy to do that sort of thing because, again, these are partnerships, right? And there are benefits to both sides. UKAEA, so the Atomic Energy Agency, so they're people I've played lots of schools against. They run a grad scheme. This is the sort of fusion physics. And I'm licensed who are not STFC and they're based on the same sciences. I think they run one which is only in computing. Although I'm struggling, I played football with their grads, but I couldn't find details of their scheme at the moment, so then we sign off their job alerts and when it comes up then. Right. That's it. Any other questions? I. It's I asked you to be. We, yeah. Well, I don't, again, it comes back to the fact that I don't really care what the rest of your team did. Right? I'm interested in what you were up to. Okay, that's I mean, this is something that comes up all the time. So I've been reading promotion cases. And I have to keep telling people this. Stop telling me what everybody else was doing, right? It's, okay, so you were all working on this project, but what were the bits that you did in the project? I led the simulation, right? Which resulted in this project. It's just that I'm much more interested in you. I'm not going to throw your application in the bin, but it immediately creates a little bit of ambiguity about what you actually do. Well, I've not fallen asleep anyway.
I have one line question for somebody's time. I think that's good to wait. So, you know, how wide would you cast the net for including experience and applications? What counts as relevant?
That's a really difficult one to answer. So when I was applying for a job, one of the criteria was management experience, which in a scientific context I didn't have any. But when I was undergrad for a holiday, I worked at Lego Labs, and I'd done some team management there, and I put it in, and I suspect it didn't get me I didn't get a 4, but I might have scraped a 2, and that was enough to keep me in the running. And I mean, I did get the job. So